Thank you.
We're good.
Okay.
It is 6:00 p.m. and we're going to have an informational session this evening regarding the redistricting process. Let's start by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And as I stated, we'll be going over the 2022 redistricting process, and City Clerk Monica Hennessy Mohan will guide us this evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight I have an overview of the process and then our census numbers. And I'm looking for direction at the end of the meeting. If you want to take further review, we can do that. So Brad is going to run my PowerPoint. And I also handed out to the council, and media have the handout. So we have Brad, Brad's fine. I emailed it to you Friday. Redistricting PowerPoint. Okay. So as everyone knows, every 10 years, there's a federal census. So go to the next screen. And in April of 2020 was the beginning of that federal census. And of course, March of 2020 was beginning of COVID. So there are some factors we think that affected our census numbers. And then after all the census numbers are in, the federal government does something called apportionment, where they redistribute all the congressional seats across the nation. Minnesota kept all 8 seats just by a very slim margin. So we still have 8 districts. However, there may be some movement in the boundaries of those congressional seats. And then at the state level, based on the census, the state will draw boundaries for the congressional seats as well as the state legislative seats. Just as a reminder for your state and local government history, Minnesota has 67 Senate seats and 134 representative seats. Then once the state lines are drawn, it comes down to the local level, and it goes to the cities first, and we look at our wards and precincts, and then the county commissions and school boards do their redistricting. The county and school districts must use the city precinct boundaries. So we have legal requirements for city redistricting. Primarily it's Minnesota statutes 205-84, which just states that in cities electing council members by wards, wards shall be as equal in population as practicable, and each ward shall be composed of compact, contiguous territory. The other statute relates to precinct boundaries. And then the Winona City Charter requirement states that if the population of any ward varies by more than 10% from the average all wards, you need to redistrict, and each ward must be composed of a contiguous territory as regular and compact in form as practicable. I would note the state law just says equal as practicable, but there is legal rulings over the years that instead of 10% at the state level, you try to be within 5%. So that's the legal standing for redistricting. So that's an overview of the process. The timeline is very short. The state plan is due on February 15th, which is next Tuesday. The legislature, of course, couldn't agree on a plan. So I know that's a surprise. So there was a court hearing, I believe on early July or January, like January 3rd, I believe, and they had 6 weeks to come up with a plan. As of today, still no plan. We hope to get that plan within the next week. If once that plan is out, the city must complete the process by March 29th. I would note that our redistricting is by ordinance, so that requires 2 cycles through council. The law does say it's either March 29th or 6 weeks after that plan comes out, whichever comes first. So if that plan is late, we don't get additional time. So that's why I'm bringing you this information tonight, so that we have you have the information to make a quick decision on the plan. Then once the city completes our process, the county and school district have 1 month to complete theirs after we're done. So obviously, the sooner we're done, it does provide them a little bit more time. So the city responsibilities are 3 items. 1, the wards. We have to verify that the current boundaries meet both the statutory and charter requirements, and redistrict if necessary. Then we reestablish all our precincts. And finally, we need to confirm polling places for each of those precincts. So again, the wards, the population has to be as equal as practicable. The charter allows for up to a 10% variance. The boundaries must be compact and contiguous, and the precinct boundaries are within each ward. Within the last 10 years, they did change the statute. We no longer have to have precinct boundaries follow census block boundaries or physical features. So that's helpful in Winona, where you have a large area of the city that's bluff land, because there aren't a lot of roads on bluffs. So you could, it does open it up a little more to us as to what we can use for boundaries. Impacts. This is, I know I'm presenting this information to you, but if the council does, well, 2 things. 1, if a council member is redistricted into a different ward, you can serve out the rest of your term. It says depending on the amount of change, but in our city that there is not a lot of change, so you would be able to serve out your term. If you fail to complete the redistricting on time, you will lose your compensation until that is completed. So this just had to tell you there are consequences. Unlike the state, there seems to be no consequences, but you need to get it done on time.
Then we won't have to pay the city every month.
So I think it's helpful if you look at the map next that I provided. And on the map, it's a separate file. I did provide what the 2020 census numbers were per ward in the area, in the lower parts of the map. So Ward 1, the population was 6,415. Ward 2 was 6,180. Ward 3 was 6,734. And Ward 4 was 6,591. So you see the percentages behind each. Ward 1 has a negative 1% variance. That means it is 1% less than the average of, if you added up all 4 precincts and divide by 4, the average is 6,480. So Ward 1 is short 65 people from the average. Ward 2 is the lowest of the 4 precincts, and it has a variance of negative 4.63 or 300 people. Ward 3 is the largest of the four wards, and it has a positive 3.92, and Ward 4 was the second highest with a variance of 1.71. So the good news is that all four precincts are within that 5% variance. Therefore, no change is required under both the charter and statute. I would note, in looking at the census numbers, I looked at the census block group reports. It is apparent that Winona State and St. Mary's did report the number of students that are living on campus. However, it's not clear how many of the off-campus students were reported because, as Michelle knows, a lot of the students were not here during the spring and summer when the census was being completed. For the larger apartment buildings, they do assist the census with getting the numbers, but for the duplex and triplexes, they rely on the individual resident to complete the census. And as everyone knows, we do have a large population of college students in Ward 2 and 3. So it's my recommendation is to not make any changes in the ward boundaries nor the precinct boundaries, because we did have a lot of polling site changes in 2020 due to looking for more accommodating polling sites due to COVID. So just with the number of changes that we had in the last election, I think it would be prudent to keep the same polling sites and precincts. So if you have any questions.
Monica, I agree we shouldn't change anything. I think what you've said to us is probably that if the students had been here and when they finally were able to come around in the summer, all the students had already moved to their new location. So trying to figure out who lived where when was impossible. So I'm going to guess that those numbers are a lot closer in reality when you look at the tenants they're actually occupying now versus when they did the census back in 2020. I know a lot of our single family duplex and triplex places were completely vacant. They were all home taking class. We had a few stay, but most were not here. And as you stated, the census called the bigger buildings to get information, but they did not call on all of the smaller ones. So I suspect these numbers are much closer than they appear. And since we don't have to change it, I would go with your recommendation not to.
Any other comments or questions at all? Steve?
I would. The census from spring of 2020 has been something I followed, and I think it is really important that we continue to follow that process as a city. I know that's going a little bit outside what we've talked about. So I hope we continue to pursue and hope that those numbers are accurate. I know there's a mechanism to challenge them and to help us understand that they really are accurate. I've talked to actual census takers, two different ones, who said that their instructions were to count students where they would have been, even if they went back home, that they should have been counted in March and April if they were a Winona State student and had been living in Winona in a rented home, for example, that in Winona. So it's important that we maintain that count. A lot of things right on that. So.
Yep, and Mayor and Council, I would note the appeal for census is still ongoing and is really a separate process from the redistricting. In looking at some of the specific blocks I did look at a couple things that didn't make sense that we'll need to do a little more research on and perhaps appeal some of those numbers.
Good. I'm happy to report I got called on 2 triplexes that I own. They asked me who would be here, and I helped them with that. So.
Okay. Nothing else this evening? Do we need to make any sort of decision on moving forward?
No, if there's consensus, what I will do is prepare for the next council meeting a resolution. Well, assuming that we get the state numbers.
On
as soon
time.
as soon as we get that state plan, I'll be presenting a resolution to keep with the same ward and precinct boundaries and also the same polling sites. And then that is relayed over to the county and the school board. I would note Sandra Sukla is here if you have questions on impact on county as well.
Does anybody have any questions for Sandra? No? Okay, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. All righty,
Okay,
we will end the informational session and we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes here.
Good.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. We have a consent